From both personal experience and working with students in clinical practice, getting an action plan or being failed in placement is soul-crushing, but I'm here to support you in seeing it from a different angle. If you are new here, then this is The London Nurse. I'm Ben, I'm a registered children's nurse, and I make videos to try and help learners in clinical practice. So if that's you or you want to watch more, then please subscribe to the channel, that would be great. If healthcare professionals that are in assessing roles of learners in practice notice that a student might be not achieving everything that they set out to do, then they would be failing the student if they didn't point those things out. Whenever I look after a learner in practice, I always give constructive feedback at the end of every shift, and I try to aim to meet that individual maybe halfway through the shift if they're working more independently, so we can just have a quick catch up and maybe highlight some of the things that I've seen that maybe the individual needs to work on, because there is always something to develop and enhance. When I was training to be a nurse, at every midpoint of every placement there would always be quite a large list of things that I would need to work on, be that time management, my communication skills. More often than not, it was down to my confidence. And sometimes, even though it wasn't called an action plan, there was definitely a plan of action put in for me to be able to achieve on those areas. However, when you have a learner in practice that isn't responsive to that feedback, or there doesn't seem to be any improvement in the area that you've highlighted, then sometimes the next stage is to document these concerns. We refer to this documentation as an action plan. An action plan is a plan of action outlining an area of concern with an associated vision of success. However, it's feedback and it's personal feedback, and therefore you are going to take it personally, and it will start to affect your confidence if the only thing you focus on is the fail part or the referral part and not necessarily the area for outline. Now, this alone is one of the biggest things that happens when an action plan gets put in. The learner in practice only focuses on the fact that they feel as though they've failed, but I presume that you are here today watching this video to know how to come off an action plan or to achieve the goals that are set out within it. So here are my suggestions. Now, my first point actually relates to the latest video that I released, and it's about getting feedback. From the very start of your placement, you must make gaining feedback an absolute priority. Now, getting as much feedback as you can from the very start of your placement is going to provide you with a very important benchmark for yourself. Also, as part of this feedback, try to gain verbal feedback from the staff that you're working with, or even other students. If you're a first year and there are second and third years there, those second and third years could potentially be real key people to identify to provide you with real evidenced feedback on what you're doing well, what maybe needs to change, but those areas of change, they may have some really useful hints and tips because they've literally just been through that process themselves. Maybe as learners in practice, you can start your own little routine going maybe halfway through the day and then at the end of the day where you observe each other and then you give feedback on one area that's really good and an area that maybe you need to develop in. So as an example, you might be sitting with a patient talking them through a treatment plan, and the good feedback with that could be that you seemed knowledgeable and you had a nice open natural feel to your body language, but maybe an area you could develop in is the words that you choose. Maybe you need to come up with some other words to explain some of those procedures. Get that routine going. You're going to be able to get an instant awareness of what's going well and maybe then something to spend the rest of that day working on. This will build up a routine of gaining feedback, but will also start to generate a learning culture in which feedback is given freely, as well as starting to get you to be open to receiving feedback from staff. However, what do you do if you actually find yourself on an action plan? Then what? You've got to engage. Be engaged from the very start of that process. So as I was just saying in the previous section, if you're gaining feedback from staff, from other learners in practice, you might start to build up a log of areas in which you need to focus your energy on and to develop. Please take those as areas for improvement, because then if and when your assessor may need to give you some constructive feedback and start having a conversation about their concerns, then the areas for improvement you've already clocked and highlighted, you can then have a conversation about what it is that you're struggling with in order to achieve in those areas, and then that is a much more helpful conversation than just hearing the assessor say to you that they don't feel as though you're doing well in practice. You're engaged immediately in that learning conversation. So if your assessor or supervisor starts to give you feedback in which they're concerned about an area of practice, practice and you show that you are aware already and you're trying to work on it, but these are the things that you're trying to put in, but it doesn't seem to help, that conversation is a very different one to one where you shut down when you receive that constructive feedback because it's an attack against you. Remember that nobody comes to work to do a bad job. So the people giving you this feedback or maybe having these conversations about action plans are not doing it to crush your soul. They are doing it to improve your ability in the role that you're studying to do, and ultimately that you are able to qualify. So by engaging in the process from as early on as you can, you will be able to gain clarity in the exact points of which they are concerned. All an action plan is it's documented evidence of an assessor's concerns of an area that you need to develop in, that they're not seeing progress being made. So ultimately, they will create a script for you outlining exactly what they expect for you to achieve in that area. So the answers to their concerns. Let's look at an example, and it's a common one I see quite a lot. So an action plan will always try to be split up into these types of areas. The first thing on an action plan will always be the concern or the area that needs to be improved. So in this case, you can see that Ben requires some consistent prompting when completing nursing duties. The next section is usually kind of what is required from the student in terms of their action. So Ben needs to implement a planner system to highlight duties and their time, and to use this each shift, updating it accordingly. Available support will be the next thing, where the staff member needs to highlight what support exactly is available for you. So in this case, my assessor has said that they will create a planner system that works for me and for the unit. My assessor will set clear expectations for me each shift and catch up halfway through each shift, and then I will work with supervisors with clear objectives and aims for the day and gaining support from the student facilitator team. Then the next bit is a review date or a target date. My assessor here has said that they're going to review the progress with feedback daily, and my assessor is going to come back to this in a week's time and see where my achievements have been made. And then the final bit will always be an area for feedback or for evidence, whether you've achieved or not achieved the outlined action plan. So luckily, this worked. You can see that I am much more self-driven when I'm in placement, and I've also grown in confidence, being able to manage independently with a minimum of 2 patients. Regardless of whether you are really resilient and not even fazed by this process whatsoever in practice, it is always a very good idea to reach out to your university. If proper process has been followed, the person completing the action plan should have either asked you to reach out to your university or would have reached out to the academic assessor themselves to ensure that there is support for you from a university perspective. Remember that universities are responsible for you when you're in practice, so they have to be aware that concerns have been raised. So the support during a referral interview should either be your personal tutor from the university, or somebody that is associated with that trust, or somebody that is associated with that clinical area from the university, so they can come and make sure that process is followed correctly for you. Or it could be somebody like me in clinical practice that is there to support learners in practice. And even though I'm a member of staff from the same hospital that you're in being referred from, it is my job and that person's job to ensure that process is followed and what needs to be achieved to come off the action plan. Now the following thing I just briefly want to touch on is that beautiful thing of reflection. Now there is 2 elements to reflection. The kind of reflection that you do when you're on the way home from placement, thinking back on the day, and then there's also the reflection in which you document. So going back to the example that we looked at where I was requiring consistent prompting in order to carry out my nursing duties, I could write a reflection on my experiences of going through practice from that viewpoint. So I met with my assessor, I was referred in practice on X point, I immediately put a shift planner in, and then this is what it felt like to work from that shift planner. My assessor then gave me some feedback in which they could see that I was growing in confidence because I was able to look after my patients more independently, really enhancing my professional growth. A reflection must demonstrate awareness into your own strengths and areas for development. So provide yourself with constructive feedback. Exercises like this can be quite tough to begin with. You're not necessarily going to see immediate results of, well, I reflected, why do I not feel any better? Because like anything, it's practice and perseverance. So by following your plan of action in your action plan, you should be well on your way to achieve the areas of development required. And therefore, the action plan may get signed off within a couple of days, depending on what the area is for improvement. improvement. Going through this process will certainly not be easy, so definitely seek support. But I guarantee you, if you engage in this process, your ability to demonstrate your awareness and professional integrity will be huge and will certainly not go unnoticed by the assessment team. Ultimately, the goal of an action plan is for you to continue to grow and develop as a professional, that you're working to become better in those areas. Until next time, be kind to yourself and stay safe.